Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Hope everybody is finding themselves off of an awesome weekend, feeling rested and restored. I'm excited to come to you guys again with another Learn with Lo for this Monday. I really want to pick up where we left off talking about this gut health conversation from last week. Lots of great DMs, amazing questions of you guys really reaching out and starting to put your thinking caps on a little bit when it comes to just managing some of these more common topics that we think about when it comes to hearing about overt gut symptoms that a lot of people are dealing with on a regular basis, but also more than anything, not finding a great course of answers. That's something that I'm very, very passionate about, is making sure that people don't normalize these types of signs and symptoms, but also are recognizing more and more how multiple different symptoms that are impacting quality of life actually really fit together. And a lot of the symptoms may explain themselves and kind of correct themselves when we start to address the body as one systematic unit, not a series of different parts and pieces, and treat this symptom over here with this specialist and this symptom over here with this supplement or this prescription. It's just not how the body works. And you're going to hit a lot of dead ends and a lot of band-aid solutions when you treat it as such. So with our awesome gut health conversation of last week and really starting to talk about gut health as it pertains to what we call this kind of like north to south approach, we want to understand also then where do we start? Where do we kind of start a lot of these hormonal journeys? And a lot of what we'll talk about today goes back to understanding our nervous system. Our nervous system is something that is controlled by our brain. Our brain is constantly scanning the internal and external environment for signs of threat, for signs of stress. That's what our body is designed to do, and it does it perfectly. Whether or not we always like the downstream consequences of such, that's for another matter, but at least we can really start to wrap our brains around some ways to maximize and control this. So as today, we'll really kind of build on these gut health conversations by diving into the first focus, which a lot of people, again, unless you really have been around and kind of heard me speak about the proper order of operations in which to talk about hormonal health, you may not really recognize. You're like, if we're talking about gut health, why in the heck is this chick talking about the brain? It's like, that's exactly why I'm talking about the brain, is because we're referring to gut health. There's such a close connection between the brain and the gut. The brain and the gut axis is communicating both ways. Like I said, brain to gut, but also gut back to the brain. What is the body sensing? What is going on in the overall system so that everybody is on the same page, right? So one of the biggest components of this overall gut to brain connection is our nervous system. Our nervous system is split into two different parts, and then there's some subparts as we get into it, but we have our autonomic nervous system on one part, and that is something that is not under our conscious control. Thank goodness for that, because the autonomic nervous system is what is controlling things like our pupils dilating in response to different light. Also, our autonomic nervous system keeps our heart beating. It regulates our respiration rate. It regulates things like digestion and blood sugar levels and all of those good things that we, thank goodness, don't have to consciously think about digesting our food. That would be way too time consuming and brain consuming. We wouldn't be able to think about anything else. So there's this whole slew of different things that are under our unconscious control, or the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system has two different halves in and of itself. We have our sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight. And then we have our parasympathetic nervous system, which is that rest and digest pathway. I set all of this groundwork for you guys because we're going to dive into the power that this nervous system has on our overall physical well-being. And that's why there's no separation of mental health from physical health. What your brain speaks, your body definitely hears. So we have to really make sure that we're always treating the body as one whole unit, and that is both the physical and the mental body as well. So when we think about the brain really having a huge impact on controlling a lot of this involuntary reaction of how our gut responds to food and digests food, we have to make sure that we're giving it all due respect to put it in the best possible place to make sure our gut is functioning optimally. So when we think about these two different halves of our overall nervous system, and that sympathetic side of our nervous system, that is our fight or flight. You better bet that when our brain senses threat or stress, that it is not worried about digesting food. Not in the slightest, right? All of the blood flow shuns away from the gut and the stomach. We're going to see a decrease in saliva production here. We're seeing a decrease in stomach acid production. Things like digestive motility or peristalsis just comes to a halt. We have decreased gallbladder activity. Our blood sugar raises. Our pupils dilate. Our blood flow is going from the midline to our extremities. Our hands, our fingers, our toes, our feet, our legs, our limbs, our eyes, our body is physically ready to fight. Now, the problem is in our standard society, a lot of times it may not necessarily be like a physical threat to our survival, but our body doesn't know the difference. It has the same exact response of whether it's an angry or triggering email from our boss or our coworker making passive aggressive comments or a fight over financials with our spouse. It doesn't matter. A threat is a threat. A stress is a stress. And so if we're pegged in that sympathetic side of our nervous system without any ability to turn it off, that's where we tend to get chronic issues, especially chronic gut issues, is being in that state of fight or flight. We want to be able to, for optimal gut function, be able to be in this this parasympathetic rest and digest state. This is the side where our body feels relaxed, it's calm, cool, and collected. It feels like all the blood flow can come back to those vital organs in the midsection and really digest and break down and absorb our food properly. All is well and good. In how our body was designed, we should spend a solid 90% of our day in that rest and digest state, and we should be able to see and respond to threat and stress, but then we should be able to turn it off once that immediate threat has passed. And that is a sign of a healthy stress response. It's not this understanding that we think there's this euphoric society of like, oh, I'm just never going to have any stress. I'm never going to be in that sympathetic fight or flight. That's not the case. That's not real life. We just want to understand that, yes, life will trigger us into that state. We have to be able to have a way of turning it off. And more, we're seeing individuals with nervous system dysregulation. We get individuals in our clinic all the time. I get individuals that come to me for coaching all the time that have some chronic hormonal imbalances, chronic gut issues, daily signs and symptoms that we have some nervous system dysregulation. They are stuck in this fight or flight, and they don't have a healthy stress response to be able to turn it off. Very rarely do they find themselves in a rest and digest healing state. They're mostly spending this time in that like fight or flight stressed state. So what we want to be able to really turn the tables on here is to be able to give them tools and also strengthen their ability to pull themselves out of that fight or flight and into this rest and digest. So this is where it gets fun, because there's tons of different wearables out there these days that actually provide us a lot of different health and data metrics that even like labs can't really measure, right? I can't, outside of doing some functional testing around your diurnal response to cortisol secretion throughout the day and overall metabolic markers like glucose, A1C, and insulin, like all of those from like blood and saliva can give us some really great lab indicators of your overall stress at any point in time. But I can't measure your overall stress response or how is stress impacting your overall physical health. I can tell people, oh, what is your stress level on a scale of 1 to 5? And they're like, oh, it's like a 2. It's like manageable. It's okay. Meanwhile, the world outside of them is like on fire and burning to the ground, but they're normal. That's their normal. There's like, oh yeah, I'm used to, I always run around with my head cut off. I always have 50 different things on my plate. I always, am busy from the time my feet hit the ground at 4 a.m. to the time my head hits the pillow at 10 p.m., right? We just start to normalize more and glorify really this like hustle and grind culture to the point that it actually has a lot of physical downstream ramifications that we don't respect until it becomes a really big issue. So I could ask somebody their perceived stress. I could measure on labs their perceived stress, but we're really not going to be able to see the total impact of what is your body perceive as the impact of your daily stress trends over time until we look deeper. So one of the biggest tools that I like to use personally for myself, but also with clients that are willing to dig into some of this health data, is using something called your heart rate variability. Heart rate variability, or HRV, is going to be a measurement of what we call your vagal tone, or how well are you at shifting from that sympathetic fight or flight nervous system and being able to turn it off when the stress or the threat is gone and go back to that parasympathetic state. So this heart rate variability, or this HRV, is actually a metric that we can glean from some of these different wearable devices, like Apple Watch even has some HRV readings on it, but my favorite ones would be something like an Aura Ring, which is my all-time favorite. I love Whoop is another company that does HRV tracking. Fitbit even has some of their premium features around HRV. So looking at your heart rate variability is going to actually give us a really strong indicator of what is your body's ability to respond to stress. So a higher vagal tone, meaning someone that's really good at kind of shutting off that sympathetic nervous system, that is somebody that will have a high HRV score, right? That's a good thing. A high HRV score means that I'm feeling more adaptable to stress. I feel like I can see stress, but then I can shut it off. I feel like I have improved performance. I have great sleep. All of those types of things are going to be correlated with a higher HRV. Now, there's some, I would say, variability. There's a lot of variability to your HRV score. It's going to be dependent on your age, your gender, your exercise, your diet, your sleep, alcohol, illness, hydration, all of these different stressors, right? Which is why it's such a great metric. But when it comes to just like an overall number, if you're someone that is tracking HRV, this will make sense to you. If you haven't been tracking HRV yet, this will make sense if and when you do. But a good kind of cutoff for that HRV score is going to be 50. It is measured in milliseconds because it's measured as the distance between the RR waves on an EKG tracing, like your heartbeat. So don't worry about getting into the science or the weeds. If you are interested in getting into the science or the weeds, I encourage you to take one of my programs, like my Revive, Restore, Renew You program, where we dive all into HRV, or even any of my personalized coaching programs. I help people with this type of data all of the time. But suffice it to say, for our time today, a higher HRV is a sign of a more robust stress resiliency, and we want to see an HRV score above 50. When we start to drift into a lower vagal tone or a lower HRV, any of those lower HRV readings like below that 50 is going to indicate that we're stuck in this fight or flight state all of the time. We are easily exhausted, low cognition, brain fog, memory issues, sleep troubles, easily fall sick, and kind of have a hard time recovering from workouts, things like that. So it's one of those things where I can really glean somebody's overall resiliency. Someone that trends to have a higher HRV, they probably don't get easily triggered, meaning in the way that like, oh my gosh, one little thing in life just really like throws them over the edge physically and mentally. Someone with a higher HRV score is going to have a lot more resiliency to be able to deal with the ebbs and flows that life kind of throws at them, right? So it gives me a really great objective measurement of stress response. It gives me an objective measurement to how well is your nervous system responding to stress. It also gives me an objective measurement of the overall cumulative effect of their diet, lifestyle, exercise choices. What we would call, and I think you'll start to hear this more and more, but all of what we call the epigenetic influences. I talk about this quite a bit if you're a follower of my stories. We have your genetics, which is, yes, the genetic genome hand that you were dealt from your parents. Absolutely. We all have it, right? So that's kind of like the hand that you were dealt. Epigenetics is the sum of all of the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis of how to fuel, how to eat, how to live, how to move your body, what's your relationship with caffeine, alcohol, sleep, circadian rhythm, stress, trauma. All of those types of things are the epigenetic influences, and those are the things that are kind of determining, okay, you have this genetic hand, but how are you going to play that hand, right? So that's where this HRV is so powerful, because especially for myself, working with and consulting with individuals around their health and fitness goals, we can use this data as a huge portion of our data tracking. I don't like to just have people come in and fixate on maybe one goal that they have. They're like, I want to lose weight. Really, this weight is going to be an inside out transformation, right? So yes, we can use things like a scale, circumference measurements, body composition tracking. There is nothing wrong with having body composition change goals, but we want to go about it the right way and make sure that we're truly coming out the other side a healthier, happier, fitter version of ourselves, not just someone that like weighs less, but now I'm skinny fat, or now I have cortisol levels and anxiety through the roof, right? So when we look at these, I always am looking at these types of data metrics, even with clientele that let me in on this, because I think it's a huge portion of what I call like our non-scale data metrics that we want to see track and trend in a positive direction over time. So if you're not already tracking things like your sleep trends, how much time are you spending asleep? How much time are you spending in a deep sleep pattern, which is huge for your overall body's ability to control that stress response. Also, are you tracking things like HRV? Are you tracking, for ladies, are you tracking things like your menstrual cycle, right? When we start to then input different nutritional strategies into our life or different exercise strategies into our life, we start to change the way that we live and move and breathe and treat ourselves from an inside out. We can start to watch and see how do these changes really invoke an inside out perspective. Great example that I'll give you is I had an opportunity to meet with a new client even just a couple weeks ago, and I noticed that she was wearing an Oura ring in our session, and it was part of our intake session. She came in with all sorts of labs, and she had recently gotten a breast cancer diagnosis, so we had lots of different things that we were working through, right? But I noticed she was wearing an Oura ring, and I was like, do you mind if I take a peek at that? And she's like, no, absolutely not. So we got a chance to really talk about her HRV data and her sleep data, and we got to set some goals. And I was like, one of my goals is to watch and track, and I want to see at least a 25, if not 30% increase in your HRV readings as we put some different nutritional and exercise strategies into your day. So now it's not her just focusing on maybe like a number on the scale, but like this is a bigger health journey, and we want to track and see my body's overall stress response. So again, heart rate variability is measuring that vagal tone, our ability to shift between that fight or flight and get out of that fight or flight and get us back into that rest and digest state. A higher HRV score or HRV scores trending above 50 does indicate a more stress resiliency picture. lower HRV scores or a lower vagal tone below 50 indicates somebody that does not have a really robust stress response, and they have a pretty full stress bucket. And because of that, we're starting to see that their physical body is noticing the way that stress is impacting their overall health. So I think it's super cool to be able to kind of track and trend these things over time. If you guys are curious about even digging into more of the research behind HRV, I'm happy to share it with you. I will read a little excerpt from a review article that was published in April of 2020. And so this is a few years ago. We already knew that this HRV data was going to be super helpful for us. But I think it's really insightful to see all of the different chronic health conditions that we're using this HRV metric for as well. So I'll just read this to you, part of the abstract of this research article. But a reduced HRV, like we said, a low HRV, below 50, low vagal tone, reduced HRV is associated with the development of numerous conditions, including diabetes, cardiovascular disease, inflammation, obesity, and even psychiatric disorders too, right? That mental health connection. We've also been able to show different diet strategies that positively impact HRV. Things like omega-3 fatty acids, B vitamins, probiotics, polyphenols, maintaining a healthy body composition. Things that don't do well for HRV, increased saturated fat intake, trans fats, or your plant oils, as well as our high glycemic carbohydrates have been found to negatively impact HRV. So how cool that we're starting to correlate trends of like, I can change how I'm eating, change how I'm moving, change how I'm sleeping, change how I'm managing my stress or my alcohol through food or exercise or caffeine, and making these changes in my lifestyle. I get to witness objective trends over time and really figure out like what works for me. Because that's what I like to use a lot of this data for, because everybody is different. So it's such a customized journey to help somebody figure out what diet strategy works for you. Don't just slap a label on yourself because your coworker did keto, so you feel like that should work for you too. It doesn't work that way. It's about understanding what is going to fit you and utilizing some of these hard, steadfast metrics to be able to track those trends. So again, and then like I said, there's all sorts of different things that we can do to actually strengthen your vagal tone. Yes, your vagal tone is a muscle. So not only changing dietary patterns, changing exercise patterns, changing sleep patterns, things like alcohol, caffeine consumption, but also there are a lot of different, these fall under what we call kind of like those biohacking tools to really help us strengthen someone's vagal tone as well. I use those for individuals that come to me with a lot of like autoimmune disease. That is one of those where we definitely need to attack something like your HRV and strengthen your vagal tone, because so much of your immune system is located in your gut, and this gut-brain axis is very much correlated to some of those HRV readings. So I use the HRV with lots of different clients. It's not just a high performance metric anymore that athletes use. I'm using it more and more in just, like I said, generalized disease tracking, and really helping people with an inside out transformation. So again, I get lots of questions about my Aura Ring. How do I use it? What are the metrics that I get from it? And I would say between the sleep metrics that I get from it, its ability to track things like changes in basal body temperature for menstrual cycle accuracy and changes, as well as tracking things like resting heart rate, respiration rate, HRV, overall readiness score. Those are just invaluable tools for me personally, but then also invaluable tools for me professionally to help align more data metrics than we could possibly ever get in a lab scenario, and give you in your hands that real-time empowerment to be able to deduce for yourself as we go on that journey together of really figuring out what your body responds to. And there's, to me, nothing more empowering than putting that real-time data in your hands and you can see, you're like, oh, wow. So when I do XYZ, I saw a huge positive jump in my HRV. It's like, okay, then your body responds really well to that, right? And so that's where it's very, very helpful to be able to customize an individual's approach, but also be able to give us hard, steadfast data where maybe sometimes we don't want to see it, or we don't recognize the overall impact that our stress or perceived stress may not be a great barometer on how our body is impacted by our stress. So if you're interested in learning more about the HRV metrics or just not some of those non-scale health wearables and interpreting your own information, again, I encourage you to enroll in one of my ongoing programs that I utilize these with clients on a group basis, or head over to the link in my Instagram profile. You can apply to work with me one-on-one in a personalized setting too, where we utilize a lot of this different data. It's not a requirement by any means, but a lot of people want some help in being able to interpret these and apply them to their life and use them in a positive way as well. So hopefully that was helpful for you to really learn a little bit about HRV and what it means for our stress response, and it being something that's way more than this like high performance athlete type measurement. It really gives us a huge sneak peek into your overall stress resiliency, which is going to play into a lot of chronic health markers. So thanks for joining me on this Learn with Flo, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. See you next Monday.